"Let him die here, blind and useless," hissed the widow, her eyes hard as stone, as the merciless desert sun melted the last vestiges of hope in the boy's empty eyes. The icy chains tightened around his thin wrists, the scorching sand burned his already scarred skin, and the terrifying silence promised an end. But then a deep roar tore through the horizon, and what followed defied all logic and humanity, forever changing the fate of the small orphan. The deep sound was not one of fury, but of an imposing presence that made the sand beneath the boy's feet vibrate. His senses, sharpened by blindness and fear, picked up the strong, wild scent approaching, mingled with the desert heat. An immense shadow covered him for an instant, and he felt a damp, warm snout brush against his chained hand. There was no aggression, only cautious curiosity. The boy's heart pounded erratically, but, strangely, absolute panic began to give way to a childlike perplexity. He extended a trembling hand, touching the soft, sturdy fur of something he couldn't name, but which didn't seem to want to harm him. The jaguar, majestic in its coat speckled with dark rosettes, observed the small, defenseless being. Its amber eyes, which had witnessed human cruelty many times, fixed on the chains binding the boy's thin wrists. With surprising strength and instinctive precision, it bit the weakest link of the chain, and the metallic sound of its rupture echoed in the desert silence. The boy, free, fell to his side. The skin on his wrists marked bright red, but the oppressive weight had vanished. He raised his face, his empty eyes searching for the source of that unexpected relief. The jaguar then gently nudged him with its head, a gesture the boy interpreted as an invitation. He felt the warmth of the animal's body beside him, a protective barrier against the merciless sun. Slowly, with the jaguar guiding him with gentle touches and firm nudges, he began to walk. The scorching sand gave way to softer, cooler earth beneath his bare feet. The air, previously dense and dry, began to carry a different scent of vegetation and moisture. He heard the sweetest sound he had ever heard, the murmur of running water. Guided by his unexpected protector, the boy arrived at a hidden oasis, a green miracle amidst the golden vastness. The cool shade of the palm trees embraced him, and the scent of life was intoxicating. He knelt at the edge of a small lake, his trembling hands dipping into the fresh, crystal-clear water. He drank long gulps, feeling life return to every cell of his exhausted body. The jaguar sat a few feet away, watching him with silent vigilance, its eyes fixed on the horizon, as if guarding a precious treasure. Meanwhile, the widow, in her opulent and cold mansion, felt a different kind of relief. She had returned to the comfort of her chambers, the silence of the house echoing her satisfaction. In her mind, the problem was solved. The blind grandson, the burden on her reputation and fortune, no longer existed. She imagined the sun consuming him, the sand swallowing his remains, and a cruel, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. Her thoughts were focused on the numbers in her ledgers, on the jewels adorning her neck, on the absolute control she now had over everything. Her lack of remorse was as complete as the darkness she had imposed on the little boy. She couldn't know that. Miles away in the heart of the desert, a majestic jaguar was defying her cruelty, weaving a new destiny for the boy she had condemned. Nature, in its ancestral wisdom, had extended a hand, or rather a paw, to protect innocence and thus rewrite a story that seemed destined for such a tragic end. The boy, Lucas, felt the coolness of the water and the shade of the palm trees. His thirst had been quenched, but weariness still weighed on his limbs. He nestled against the rough trunk of a palm tree, feeling the warmth of the sun filtered through the leaves. Near him, the jaguar, majestic and silent, sat like a guardian. Lucas, with his senses sharpened by blindness, heard the soft rustle of the wind in the leaves and the steady beat of the jaguar's heart, a sound that, strangely, brought a sense of security. He extended a trembling hand, touching the animal's soft, sturdy fur. The jaguar tilted its head, a low purr vibrating in its chest, a sound of acceptance that calmed the boy's frightened heart. The jaguar, as if understanding the little one's fragility, rose with an almost ethereal agility. Lucas felt the air move and heard the rustle of leaves as it moved away for a brief moment. An old fear of abandonment gripped him, but soon the sound of light footsteps returned. A sweet, earthy scent filled the air before something soft and succulent was gently nudged against his hand. It was a wild fruit, a gift from nature which Lucas brought to his mouth. The sweet and refreshing taste was a balm for his soul and body. The jaguar watched, its amber eyes fixed, ensuring he would eat, revealing a tenderness that transcended its wild nature. Meanwhile, in the cold and silent mansion, the widow Ilara enjoyed an opulent dinner. The silence at the table was her preferred companion, allowing her thoughts to focus on the vastness of her fortune. Each piece of silver cutlery gleamed, each dish exuded an expensive aroma. But nothing was as satisfying as the idea that her grandson's problem had been resolved. A cruel, almost imperceptible smile curved her thin lips. She mentally scrolled through the list of her assets, the value of her properties. Lucas's absence was a relief, a weight lifted without remorse. Her mind, hermetically sealed, knew only avarice and control. In the oasis, Lucas began to learn to trust his other senses in a way he had never needed to before. The jaguar guided him with gentle touches of its snout or paw, showing him safe paths between tree roots and smooth stones. He learned to recognize the sound of its breathing when it was near, the warmth of its body when it lay beside him. Together, they explored the small, green paradise. The jaguar seemed to know every corner, every food source, every cool shadow. It was his compass, his eyes in the world he couldn't see. With each passing day, Lucas's body grew stronger, and hope, once crushed, began to blossom in his heart, nurtured by the presence of his guardian. Nature, in its ancestral wisdom, had woven a web of protection around the boy. The desert, which the widow Ilara had hoped would be his tomb, became his sanctuary. The jaguar, a wild creature, revealed a tenderness that humanity, in the figure of Ilara, seemed to have forgotten. Lucas's survival was not just a miracle, it was a silent declaration that human wickedness could not extinguish the light of innocence, and that love, in its most unexpected forms, would always find a way. With each day Lucas spent under the jaguar's guard, the web of fate tightened around Ilara, ready to reveal to everyone the truth she so desperately wanted to hide. The sun began to set, painting the desert sky with shades of orange and purple as the temperature gently dropped. Lucas, nestled against the jaguar's warm flank, felt the steady rhythm of its heart. For the first time, he was not alone. For the first time in his life, he felt truly safe. The jaguar, with its vigilant eyes, watched the darkness swallow the horizon, a silent sentinel of a love that defied all expectations. The blind boy, abandoned and presumed dead, was alive, and his story was just beginning to be told. A testament to nature's relentless justice, the rising sun painted the oasis with golden hues, filtering through the palm trees and warming the sand. Lucas, nestled beside the jaguar, felt Sombra's sturdy body stir. A deep purr vibrated in the animal's chest, and the boy knew it was time to awaken. He stretched his thin arms, feeling the muscle ache that, strangely, reminded him he was alive and safe. Sombra rose with silent grace, and Lucas felt the warmth she had left behind. He sat up, guided by the sound of the stream and the sweet aroma of the fruits the jaguar had brought the night before. Days in the oasis wove a routine of survival and affection. Sombra, his guardian, guided Lucas with gentle touches of her snout, showing him where to find the sweetest fruits, nutritious roots, and fresh water. Lucas, with his senses sharpened by blindness, learned to decipher the sounds of the environment. The bird song, the rustle of dry leaves beneath his feet, and the murmur of the wind. His disability, once a burden, now connected him to the world in a new and profoundly intimate way. He trusted Sombra with absolute faith, a mutual loyalty that transcended the species barrier, born of necessity and the pure altruism of the beast. At the mansion, Ilara maintained her pose as a respectable widow. Lucas's absence raised no questions. She had spread the story of a distant boarding school for special needs children, a lie readily accepted. Her mornings were dedicated to ledgers, her thin fingers gliding over the numbers that represented her growing fortune. Money was her only solace, her only true and unconditional love. A cruel, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips at the thought that her grandson's burden had been removed. The idea of Lucas succumbing to the desert did not disturb her. On the contrary, it reinforced her belief that she had acted with practicality and intelligence. However, a subtle crack began to appear in the armor of her indifference. Miguel, the gardener, a man of few words but keen eyes, had noticed Lucas's sudden absence. He remembered seeing the boy being taken by Ilara in a carriage towards the desert, and the widow's return, alone and with a strangely satisfied air, didn't sit right with him. Miguel, who had always had a quiet affection for Lucas, felt a tightening in his chest, a dark premonition. He dared not confront Ilara, for he knew her cruelty. But the seed of doubt was planted. He observed his mistress with new attention, noticing the coldness that radiated from her and the complete absence of any mention of her grandson. In the oasis, Lucas and Sombra shared the serenity of dusk. The boy told invented stories to the jaguar, and she responded with soft purrs, as if understanding every word. Their connection deepened each day, proving that love and loyalty could flourish in the most unusual places. Lucas no longer felt despair. A silent, resilient hope filled his being. He knew that with Sombra, he would never be alone. Nature had granted him a second chance, a wild miracle that human wickedness could not destroy. Justice, though slow, was beginning to turn its gears, and the truth, like the water bubbling up in the oasis, would inexorably find its way to the surface. The silent promise of justice began to unfold. In the oasis, Lucas not only survived, he thrived. His days were a symphony of invisible discoveries. Sombra, his loyal guardian, taught him the language of nature with gentle touches of her snout, guiding him along safe paths between palm trees and soft sand. Lucas learned to distinguish birdsong, the rustle of dry leaves, and the sweet scent of flowers, connecting to the world in a way his blindness had never allowed. A resilient hope blossomed in his heart. The jaguar, in turn, seemed to draw a deep quietude from the boy's company. She hunted with her usual ferocity, but returned to the oasis with unusual haste, as if a soul depended on her. She shared her smaller prey with Lucas, who felt the texture of the meat and its warmth. With each meal, each touch, the bond between them strengthened, an invisible tapestry of love and trust woven in the vastness of the desert. Lucas, once a burden, was now the reason for a wild creature's existence, and his life gained a new and precious purpose. While life flourished in the oasis, in Ilara's mansion, the coldness deepened. She had surrendered to a routine of opulence and control, with days dedicated to lawyers and accountants, calculating every decision to increase her fortune. Lucas's absence was a welcome silence, a void filled by the clinking of coins and the sparkle of jewels. Her heart, hardened by avarice, celebrated the freedom of not having to deal with what she considered a disgrace, without a shred of remorse or longing. However, the seed of doubt planted in the mind of Miguel, the gardener, began to germinate. He couldn't forget the image of Lucas being taken away, nor Ilara's strangely satisfied air. Driven by persistent intuition and genuine affection for the boy, Miguel observed the widow with renewed attention. He noticed that despite her wealth, Ilara lived in isolation, and her house, though grand, was devoid of human warmth. Her coldness became more evident, and the story of the distant boarding school sounded increasingly hollow, fueling his growing distrust. One afternoon, while tending to the rose bushes, Miguel overheard Ilara talking to a servant about reorganizing old documents, mentioning a box in the attic with worthless papers. Miguel's curiosity was piqued. He knew of Ilara's meticulousness, and the idea of something worthless coming from her was suspicious. He wondered if these papers were connected to Lucas. His fear of Ilara was real, but his concern for the boy was greater. He decided that, at the first opportunity, he would investigate the attic, even aware of the risks. In the oasis, Lucas, guided by Sombra, discovered a small cave hidden by dense foliage. The air inside was cool and damp, and the fine sandy floor offered a perfect refuge. Sombra lay at the entrance, her amber eyes sweeping the horizon, while Lucas explored the space with his hands, feeling the rocky walls and a strange peace. It was his new home, a sanctuary built by nature and guarded by a jaguar. Each day, Lucas moved further away from his past of abandonment, embracing a future of hope, where Sombra's love and loyalty were his most precious fortune. Lucas awoke to the soft brush of Sombra's fur against his cheek. The cave, once an unknown refuge, was now his home, filled with the earthy, fresh scent of stone and the wild, comforting aroma of his guardian. He stretched his thin arms, feeling his muscles stronger. A result of days of exploration guided by the jaguar, Sombra, with a low, vibrant purr, nudged a succulent fruit close to his hand, a morning ritual that sealed the trust and affection between them. Lucas smiled, a genuine and hopeful smile that rarely appeared on his face before, and brought the fruit to his mouth, savoring the sweetness that nature, through Sombra, offered him. Days turned into weeks in the oasis. Lucas, under Sombra's constant protection, was no longer the fragile, frightened boy the widow had abandoned. He had learned to move with surprising dexterity, his bare feet knowing every irregularity of the terrain, every exposed root, every smooth stone. His ears, once merely a means of orientation, now picked up the smallest sounds with impressive clarity. The silent flight of an insect, the distinct rustle of a dry leaf in the wind, the distant and melodic call of a bird. Sombra was his shadow, his tireless guide, his unusual family. She led him to hidden streams, to fruit-laden trees, and taught him to feel the subtle shift of the wind, to anticipate the arrival of refreshing rain. The jaguar, with its infinite patience and protective instinct, seemed to understand Lucas's need to connect to the world in a unique way, beyond sight. The connection between them was an unbreakable bond, forged in the solitude of the desert and in the purest, most altruistic love. Meanwhile, in the opulent mansion, Ilara continued her life of luxury and self-imposed solitude. The silence of the house was her absolute reign, punctuated only by the discreet footsteps of servants who avoided her cold gaze. She spent hours in her vast library, immersed in financial documents, her expression severe and focused, her thin, ringed fingers gliding over the numbers that represented her growing fortune. Lucas's absence was a silent victory, a painful chapter she believed she had closed forever in her calculating mind. She was convinced she had erased all traces of her cruelty, and the lie of the distant boarding school seemed to have solidified in everyone's minds. A thin, self-satisfied smile, almost imperceptible, crossed her lips when she thought of her fortune, now undisputed and free of burdens. However, the mansion's quietude was illusory, a fragile facade. Miguel, the gardener, couldn't shake the image of the blind boy from his mind. Every rosebush he carefully pruned, every flowerbed he watered under the sun, seemed to whisper Lucas's name, a persistent echo in his conscience. The boarding school story didn't convince him. Ilara's coldness and the speed with which Lucas had disappeared were too much for his honest intuition to ignore. The mention of worthless papers in the attic echoed in his mind like a call. He knew the attic was a forbidden place, full of old junk and memories Ilara preferred to forget, a labyrinth of shadows and dust. But his genuine concern for Lucas was stronger than his fear of the widow, stronger than the risk of losing his job. One night, when the mansion was immersed in deep sleep and the full moon, like a watchful eye, illuminated the silent gardens, Miguel decided to act. With his heart pounding in his chest, a dull drum against his ribs, he grabbed an old lantern and ascended the creaking stairs that led to the dusty attic, each step a protest. The air upstairs was heavy, laden with the smell of mold, old things, and forgotten secrets. He knew he was risking his job, perhaps even his personal safety, but the image of the blind, abandoned and defenseless boy propelled him with unwavering force. His eyes, accustomed to the garden's darkness, swept through the dancing shadows, searching for the specific box Ilara had mentioned, the one with the worthless papers. Justice, he felt with deep conviction, needed a human hand to begin to manifest and uncover the hidden truth. Miguel, with the lantern trembling slightly in his calloused hands, swept the beam of light across the attic. The air was thick, laden with dust, and the sweet, musty smell of old things. Piles of dusty boxes rose like dark mountains, covered by white sheets that resembled silent ghosts. Every shadow seemed to harbor a secret, and Miguel's heart beat an accelerated rhythm, a mixture of fear and iron determination. He knew he was invading Ilara's privacy, but the image of little Lucas, with his empty eyes and fragility, was a heavier burden than any reprimand, propelling him forward. He moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the wooden floorboards. The beam of light danced over mahogany chests, covered furniture, and dusty portraits of forgotten ancestors. Finally, in a darker corner, almost hidden behind an old wardrobe, he saw a simple, unadorned wooden box that seemed out of place among the grander objects. It had a yellowed, almost illegible label, where Ilara's handwriting could be discerned, miscellaneous documents worthless. This was it. With trembling hands, Miguel pulled the box out. The wood creaked, releasing a cloud of ancient dust. He opened it, and the smell of old paper filled his nostrils. Inside, there were piles of old bills, receipts, and unimportant correspondence, exactly as Ilara had described. But as he rummaged, he felt something more solid at the bottom. His fingers fumbled, finding a secret compartment cleverly disguised at the bottom of the box. Miguel's heart leaped, pounding hard. With careful effort, he managed to open the compartment. Inside, there were no coins or jewels, but a small bundle of papers tied with a faded silk ribbon. The faint light of the lantern revealed the contents. A will, dated a few months prior, revoking any inheritance for Lucas, citing him as an unbearable burden and a disgrace to the family lineage. Beside it, a handwritten letter from Ilara, addressed to her lawyer, detailed her plan to remove the boy from her life forever, suggesting an accident in the desert with the promise of a generous reward for discretion. Miguel's eyes widened. It was irrefutable proof of Ilara's cruelty, the confession of her heinous and cold intention. A wave of nausea and rage rose in Miguel's throat. He clutched the papers in his hands, veins bulging in his wrists, his entire body trembling. Ilara's coldness and wickedness were even greater than he had imagined. Lucas had not been sent to a boarding school. He had been condemned to death. The words on the paper were like knives, cutting through the last hope of any innocent explanation. His eyes welled up, not from fear, but from a deep sadness for the boy and a righteous fury for the woman who had abandoned him. In the oasis, Lucas slept soundly, nestled beside Sombra. The jaguar, with her amber eyes, watched the stars dotting the dark sky. A soft rustle of the wind in the palm trees was the only sound, a lullaby for the boy she protected with her life. Peace reigned there, a bubble of serenity untouched by the darkness unfolding miles away. Lucas dreamed of the sun's warmth, the smell of wet earth, and the soft purr of his guardian, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in his name. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Elara slept in her sumptuous bed, wrapped in fine silks, a faint smile on her lips. Her dreams were of numbers, of properties, and of a future where her fortune would grow without limits, free of any burden. She did not feel the weight of the truth that Miguel now carried in his hands, nor the imminent revelation that would shake her world. Justice, silent and relentless, had found its messenger, and the truth, like the water bubbling up in the oasis, was about to flood the barrenness of her existence. Miguel, with the crumpled papers in his hands, felt the weight of that overwhelming truth. His knees buckled, and he sat heavily on a dusty chest, his heart still hammering in his chest like a caged bird. The forgotten lantern trembled in his hand, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock his discovery. Rage bubbled in his stomach, a silent fury at Elara's unimaginable cruelty. Lucas, the blind and gentle boy, was not just a burden. He was a victim of a heinous plot, abandoned to die in the desert. Miguel closed his eyes, trying to push away the image of little Lucas, defenseless under the scorching sun. The idea that Elara had planned everything with such coldness, with the promise of reward for discretion, was something he could barely conceive. The heavy attic air seemed to suffocate him, but Miguel knew he couldn't stay there forever. The truth he held was dangerous, but also liberating. He could not, in good conscience, ignore what he had discovered. His sense of justice, forged in a life of honest work and respect for life, cried out for action. But how? Elara was powerful, feared, and he was just a gardener. The fear of losing his job, of suffering reprisals was real, but the image of Lucas, betrayed innocence, was stronger. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in his hands. Carefully he folded the documents and hid them inside his old coat, feeling the rough paper against his skin. It was the proof, the weapon he needed to expose the widow. As Miguel descended the creaking stairs, each step an echo of his decision, the mansion remained asleep, oblivious to the brewing storm. In the sumptuous bedroom, Elara slept a peaceful, dreamless sleep. The morning sun, which would soon bathe the desert, had not yet reached the heavy curtains of her window. She turned in bed, a faint smile on her lips, perhaps dreaming of new investments or the expansion of her fortune. Lucas's absence was an insignificant detail in her vast empire of possessions and ambitions. She believed she had swept the problem under the desert's rug, leaving no traces, no witnesses. In the oasis, life followed its serene course. Lucas awoke to the warmth of Sombra's body beside him, the jaguar's soft purr like a lullaby extending into the morning. He sat up, stretching his arms, feeling the fresh breeze that carried the scent of water and flowers. Sombra, with a gentle nudge of her snout, guided him out of the cave, towards the stream where he washed his face, feeling the cold water invigorate his senses. The days in the oasis had transformed Lucas. He was no longer the fragile, frightened boy. His steps were firmer, his hearing and touch incredibly sharp. He laughed, a light and melodious sound, when Sombra nudged him with her paw to play, or when he felt her soft fur brush against his hand. The jaguar, his loyal guardian, watched every movement, her amber eyes filled with protective tenderness. Miguel, now in his small room at the back of the mansion, sat on the edge of the bed, the documents still hidden. He knew he needed a plan, someone he could trust. The idea of confronting Ilara alone was unthinkable. His thoughts flew to the family lawyer, Dr. Almeida, a respectable man, but one who also seemed to be under the widow's sway. No, he needed someone from outside, someone who wasn't afraid of Ilara's power. He remembered an old friend of his wife, Mrs. Clara, a woman of faith and courage, known for her strong voice in the community and her work in social causes. She could help him find the right path. The decision was clear. The truth needed to come out, not just for Lucas, but for all who suffered in silence under the shadow of cruelty. He pressed his lips together, determination etched on his tired face. Justice, he knew, was a long and difficult road, but he was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. Miguel spent the night awake, Ilara's documents hidden beneath his mattress, burning in his conscience. The image of little Lucas, with his dull eyes yet filled with touching innocence, wouldn't leave him. The widow's cruelty seemed even more monstrous under the cold light of dawn. At daybreak, with a heavy heart and an exhausted mind, he made his decision. There was no time to lose. After his morning chores, with unusual haste, Miguel put on his best clothes. They were simple but clean, and he felt the rough paper of the documents against his chest, reminding him of his mission. With the excuse of visiting a sick relative, a necessary lie, he asked permission to leave the mansion. Ilara, absorbed in financial plans, barely looked up, granting leave with a distracted nod. Miguel walked through the city streets, each step a mixture of apprehension and determination. The sun was already high, warming the air, but he felt a chill down his spine. Finally, he arrived at Mrs. Clara's small house, a refuge of simplicity and warmth. The door was open, and the smell of fresh bread and herbs invited him in. Mrs. Clara, with neatly combed grey hair and kind eyes, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch. Seeing him, she offered a warm smile. "Miguel, what a pleasant surprise! Come in, my son. What brings you here at this hour?" Miguel felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know where to begin. He sat at the table, his hands trembling. "Mrs. Clara, I need your help. It's about little Lucas." Mrs. Clara's smile faltered. She had always had a special affection for the boy. "Lucas? What happened? Widow Ilara said she sent him to a boarding school." Miguel shook his head, his eyes welling up. "No, Mrs. Clara, it's not true. I discovered something terrible." He pulled the documents from his coat, unfolding them onto the table. His voice choked. He began to read Ilara's cold and cruel words, the confession of her intention to abandon Lucas to die in the desert. Mrs. Clara listened, her face paling with each word. Her hands, previously busy with the bread dough, were clasped and trembling. When Miguel finished, the silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by her ragged breathing. Her eyes, once kind, burned with righteous indignation. "My God," she whispered, her voice laden with pain and fury. "How can a person be so heartless?" She picked up the papers, reading them again, as if she couldn't believe it. Tears began to roll down her wrinkled face. "We have to do something, Mrs. Clara," Miguel pleaded, his voice hoarse. "Lucas is out there somewhere in the desert, if he's even still alive." Mrs. Clara raised her head, determination replacing the shock in her eyes. She wiped away her tears. "And we will, Miguel. We cannot allow this evil to go unpunished." Her voice, once soft, now rang with renewed strength, the same that had made her a tireless defender of the weak. "Don't worry, my son. Justice will find its way, and we will be its instruments." She clutched the documents, feeling the weight of the truth. First, a trustworthy lawyer, someone who doesn't fear Ilara, and then we need to find Lucas. While hope and determination blossomed in Mrs. Clara's small house in the oasis, Lucas and Sombra enjoyed a peaceful day. The boy guided himself by the scent of flowers and the warmth of the sun on his skin, while Sombra hunted a small rodent, quickly returning to share it with her protégé. The jaguar brushed her snout against Lucas's hair, a gesture of affection that the boy returned with a tight hug. Life there was simple, yet rich in affection and security, a stark contrast to the darkness that was brewing. At the mansion, Ilara, oblivious to everything, counted her coins, a satisfied smile on her lips, convinced that her plan had been perfect. Miguel and Mrs. Clara, with Ilara's documents in hand, felt the weight of responsibility. Mrs. Clara's small kitchen, once a haven of peace, now seemed like the center of a silent conspiracy. "We need someone who won't bend to Ilara's money, Miguel," Mrs. Clara said, her voice firm, her eyes fixed on the papers. "Someone with a just heart and an unshakable reputation." She thought for a moment, a thoughtful finger on her chin. "I remembered a young lawyer, Dr. Ricardo. He's new in town, but already has a reputation for being upright and courageous. He has no ties to the wealthy families here, which is an advantage." Miguel nodded, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "Then let's go find him, Mrs. Clara. The sooner, the better." The next morning, with the sun still shy on the horizon, Miguel and Mrs. Clara were at the door of Dr. Ricardo's modest office. The young lawyer, with a serious demeanor and penetrating eyes, received them courteously. Upon seeing the documents Miguel laid on the table, his expression changed to one of deep concern. He read every word carefully, his lips pressed together, his brow furrowed. The will revoking Lucas's inheritance, the letter detailing the cruel plan of abandonment in the desert. It was all there, in black and white, irrefutable proof of Ilara's wickedness. When he finished, Dr. Ricardo raised his eyes to Miguel and Mrs. Clara, a mixture of shock and indignation in his gaze. "This is heinous," he whispered, his voice choked. "An unprecedented cruelty. And the boy, Lucas, is blind, isn't he?" Miguel confirmed with a sad nod. "Yes, doctor. And he's out there, somewhere in the desert, if he's even still alive." Dr. Ricardo took a deep breath, closing his eyes for an instant. The gravity of the situation was immense. "Don't worry. I'll take the case. Not for money, but for justice." He clutched the documents, feeling the weight of responsibility. "We'll need a plan. First, I'll analyze every detail legally. Then, we'll need evidence of Lucas's survival for Ilara's story to crumble. Without the boy, it will be her word against ours." He looked at Miguel. "Do you have any idea where he might be?" Miguel shook his head, despair returning. "None, doctor. The desert is vast and merciless." While hope and strategy took shape in the city, in the oasis, Lucas and Sombra lived their days in an almost mystical harmony. Lucas, now more confident, explored the limits of the oasis, guided by the scent of flowers and the murmur of water. Sombra, always vigilant, followed him closely, her amber eyes sweeping the horizon. In one of their explorations, Lucas discovered a small grotto, deeper than the cave, with a source of crystal-clear water that bubbled softly. It was an even more secret refuge, a gift from nature. He smiled, feeling the fresh water in his hands, and Sombra brushed her snout against his cheek, as if approving the discovery. The jaguar, in her silent wisdom, seemed to know that the peace there was precious and that the world outside, though distant, might one day try to reach them. At the mansion, Ilara felt an unusual pang of irritation. One of the servants had been late, and the correspondence wasn't organized to her liking. Small disruptions in her perfect routine, which she would have ignored before, now bothered her. She frowned, her lips thin, and dismissed the servant with an abrupt gesture. The silence of the house, which had once been her comfort, now seemed heavier, almost oppressive. She tried to focus on her financial documents, but a subtle unease lingered in the air, a feeling that something was out of place, though she didn't know what. It was the first crack in the facade of her tranquility, a silent premonition of the approaching storm, driven by the courage of Miguel and Mrs. Clara, and by the determination of a young lawyer seeking justice. Ilara's unease, once a subtle pang, transformed into a persistent feeling of discomfort. She walked through the mansion's corridors, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence, her fingers drumming nervously on her chin. The numbers on her bank statements, which once calmed her, now seemed blurred, unable to hold her attention. A chill ran down her spine, and she found herself looking at the garden, noticing Miguel's absence from his usual post, a small anomaly that, for some reason, deeply irritated her. There was something in the air, an imperceptible shift that put her on alert, though she didn't know what. Ilara rose abruptly, walking to the window and observing the impeccable garden. Miguel's rose bushes, always so well tended, seemed to mock her rigidity. She felt a chill down her spine, a premonition she stubbornly ignored, attributing it to business stress. Meanwhile, in Dr. Ricardo's modest office, the atmosphere was one of tension and determination. He reread Ilara's documents, each word cold and calculated, feeling the weight of injustice. Miguel and Mrs. Clara sat before him, their faces etched with worry. "We need to find Lucas," Dr. Ricardo reiterated, his voice grave, his eyes fixed on Miguel. Without him, Ilara's word, with her influence and money, could prevail. "We need living proof." Miguel clasped his calloused hands, his voice choked. "But how, Doctor? The desert is immense, and if Ilara finds out we're looking, she might try something even worse." Mrs. Clara, with her serene wisdom, touched Miguel's arm. "Faith moves mountains, my son, and justice, when true, finds its way. But we must be prudent." Dr. Ricardo nodded. "We need a discreet search. No one can know. Miguel, you know the region well. Is there anyone you trust, anyone who can help us scour the edges of the desert without raising suspicion?" Miguel thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the floor. "There's old Jose, Doctor. He's a retired treasure hunter, knows every dune and every rock in the desert like the back of his hand. He's a man of few words, but with a big heart. He doesn't bend to anyone's money, and he has a blind granddaughter, which makes him sensitive to Lucas's cause." A spark of hope lit up in Mrs. Clara's eyes. "Jose is a good man. He would help us." Dr. Ricardo tapped lightly on the table. "Perfect. Miguel, can you find him with the utmost discretion? Say it's a search for something lost, something of sentimental value, so as not to raise suspicion about Lucas." Miguel nodded firmly, determination renewed on his face. "I'll do it, Doctor, whatever it takes." In the oasis, Lucas, oblivious to the plot unfolding in his name, explored the new grotto. His fingers slid over the rocky walls, feeling the dampness and cold texture of the stone. He laughed, a light and melodious sound, when Sombra brushed her snout against his hand, guiding him to the source of crystal-clear water. The jaguar, with her amber eyes, watched the boy, a silent and vigilant guardian, feeling the peace of that secret refuge. Life there was simple, yet rich in affection and security, a stark contrast to the darkness that was brewing. The jaguar, in her silent wisdom, seemed to know that the peace there was precious, and that the world outside, though distant, might one day try to reach them. At the mansion, Ilara felt a sudden shiver, despite the day's heat. She hugged herself, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A strange and uncomfortable sense of vulnerability invaded her. She didn't know what it was, but the unease grew, like a seed planted in her heart, ready to germinate and shake the foundations of her carefully constructed life. The first crack in the facade of her tranquility deepened, a silent premonition of the approaching storm, driven by the courage of Miguel and Mrs. Clara, and by the determination of a young lawyer seeking justice, now with the hope of an unexpected ally. Ilara's unease, once a subtle pang, transformed into a persistent feeling of discomfort. She walked through the mansion's corridors, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence, her fingers drumming nervously on her chin. The numbers on her bank statements, which once calmed her, now seemed blurred, unable to hold her attention. A chill ran down her spine, and she found herself looking at the garden, noticing Miguel's absence from his usual post, a small anomaly that, for some reason, deeply irritated her. There was something in the air, an imperceptible shift that put her on alert, though she didn't know what. As Ilara grappled with her growing apprehension, Miguel, his heart heavy with urgency, headed to the oldest part of the city, where houses were humbler and stories ran deeper. He found Jose sitting on his porch, his eyes tired but sharp, his skin weathered by the desert sun. Miguel explained the search for an object of inestimable sentimental value, mentioning it belonged to a blind boy. Jose, who had a blind granddaughter, listened attentively, his eyes softening. The mention of the child struck a chord in his heart. "I will do it, Miguel," Jose said, his voice hoarse. "Not for money, but for that child. The desert has its secrets, but also its truths." Jose departed at dawn, a light backpack on his back, and the wisdom of years etched into every wrinkle of his face. He moved with the discretion of a ghost, his trained eyes sweeping the dunes, searching for any sign, no matter how small. The sun beat down, but Jose was one with the desert, reading the marks in the sand, the flight of birds, the murmur of the wind. He wasn't looking for an object, but a life, guided by the compassion Miguel's story had awakened. With each step, the image of his blind granddaughter propelled him, a silent promise that he would do everything possible to find the boy. In the oasis, Lucas and Sombra lived in their bubble of peace. Lucas, with his sharpened senses, perceived the different breeze, the scent of a new flower, the warmth of the sun on his skin. Sombra, however, was more vigilant. Her amber eyes swept the horizon with unusual intensity, her ears twitching, picking up distant sounds that the human ear would never perceive. She brushed her snout against Lucas more frequently, an instinctive gesture of protection, as if she knew their tranquility was about to be tested, that something or someone was approaching their secret refuge. Back at the mansion, Ilara's unease transformed into palpable anxiety. She couldn't sleep, thoughts racing in her mind like rats in a labyrinth. Miguel's prolonged absence, which she had initially ignored, now seemed a sinister omen. She began to question the other servants, with disguised inquiries about the gardener's whereabouts. But no one knew anything beyond the excuse of a sick relative. A cold, irrational fear began to settle in her chest, a feeling that the walls of her fortress of lies were beginning to crumble. After days of tireless searching under the relentless sun, Jose was almost giving up when, near an unusual rock formation, he noticed something. It wasn't an obvious trail, but a small footprint in the damp sand, near a trickle of water emerging from a crevice. The footprint was small, delicate, and didn't seem to belong to any wild animal. With his heart pounding, he followed the subtle trail, which led him to a greener area, with palm trees and an unmistakable scent of fresh water. There, amidst the vegetation, he found a small rag doll, made of scraps, carefully placed beside a stone. It was a simple but unmistakable toy, and Jose knew with an overwhelming certainty that he had found a sign of Lucas. Jose's hands trembled as he picked up the doll. That small object was living proof, the silent voice crying out for justice. He didn't see the boy, but the presence was undeniable. The truth was there, palpable. With the rag doll firmly in his hands, Jose turned, his heart filled with a mixture of relief and determination. He needed to go back, needed to tell Miguel and Dr. Ricardo that Lucas was alive, that justice finally would find its way to the desert and to the mansion. With the rag doll firmly in his hands, Jose turned, his heart filled with a mixture of relief and determination. He needed to go back, needed to tell Miguel and Dr. Ricardo that Lucas was alive, that justice finally would find its way to the desert and to the mansion. The journey back was quicker, driven by the urgency of the discovery. Jose arrived at Dr. Ricardo's office late in the afternoon, finding Miguel and Mrs. Clara there, anxiety evident on their faces. Seeing the old treasure hunter, the three stood up, their eyes fixed on his tired but victorious figure. Jose extended his hand, revealing the small rag doll. "He's alive," his hoarse voice broke the silence. "I found this near a hidden oasis. There's fresh water and signs that a blind boy has been there." Miguel took the doll, his hands trembling, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. Mrs. Clara let out a sigh of relief, bringing her hands to her chest in gratitude. Dr. Ricardo, with a serious expression, took the doll and examined it. "This is the proof we needed," he declared, his voice firm, the determination in his eyes stronger than ever. "With Jose's testimony and this doll, Ilara's story will crumble. Justice will be served." That same night, Dr. Ricardo acted with impressive speed. Ilara's documents, Miguel's testimony, and now Jose's irrefutable proof were presented to the authorities. News of Lucas's survival and the widow's cruelty spread through the city like wildfire. Ilara's facade of respectability began to crumble. At the mansion, the widow received the court summons, her face paling as she read the accusations. Fear, once a shadow, was now a cold, sharp reality. Her eyes wandered over the bank statements, which once brought her so much comfort, but now seemed empty, meaningless. The wealth she had so coveted could not protect her from the truth. The next day, a small team, led by Dr. Ricardo, Miguel, and Jose, set off for the desert. The journey was guided by Jose's wisdom, who led them directly to the secret oasis. The jaguar Sombra, sensing the approach of strangers, growled softly, protecting Lucas, who was sitting near the spring, singing a soft melody. Miguel, upon seeing the boy, could barely suppress a cry of emotion. Lucas was stronger, healthier, and the jaguar, his guardian, was a majestic sight of protection. Cautiously, Miguel approached, calling Lucas's name with a choked voice. The boy, surprised, extended his hand, and Sombra, recognizing Miguel's familiar scent, lowered her guard, brushing her snout against the gardener's leg. It was a moment of pure emotion and connection. Lucas, feeling Miguel's touch, smiled, a smile that lit up the oasis. Dr. Ricardo explained to Lucas, with simple and gentle words, that he was safe, that he had people who loved him, and that he would return to a home where he would be cared for. Sombra, with a look of understanding, licked Lucas's hand, as if encouraging him to follow. In the city, Ilara's downfall was swift and complete. The community, shocked by the revelation of her cruelty, turned its back on her. Her assets were frozen, and she faced legal proceedings that stripped her of her fortune and reputation. The bitterness and avarice that consumed her left her alone in her empty mansion, a reflection of her heart. Lucas, finally safe, was welcomed by Miguel and Mrs. Clara, who became his new family. Justice, though delayed, had found its way, protecting the innocent and condemning cruelty, proving that not even the most merciless desert could extinguish the light of a pure soul. Lucas, finally safe, was welcomed by Miguel and Mrs. Clara, who became his new family. Justice, though delayed, had found its way, protecting the innocent and condemning cruelty, proving that not even the most merciless desert could extinguish the light of a pure soul. Mrs. Clara and Miguel's small house, once a refuge for two kind hearts, expanded to embrace an immense love. Lucas, guided by Mrs. Clara's gentle hands, explored every corner, his curious fingers touching the textures of the walls, feeling the warmth of the wood-burning stove and the comforting smell of homemade food. The sound of Mrs. Clara's soft voice and Miguel's warm laughter were the melody that cradled his days, replacing the oppressive silence of the desert. Sombra, the majestic jaguar, did not abandon her protégé. She found a new home nearby, a small hidden clearing where she could observe the house unseen, yet always present. Sometimes, at dawn or late afternoon, Lucas felt the familiar brush of her snout against his hand, while in the garden, a silent reminder of his loyal guardian. Miguel had planted new rose bushes, and Lucas spent hours there, inhaling the sweet scent of the flowers. With Sombra lying a few feet away, her amber eyes fixed on the boy. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Lucas flourished under unconditional care and love. His skin, once punished by the sun, regained a healthy tone, and his smile, once rare, now lit up the room with contagious frequency. He learned to move with more confidence, to recognize Miguel and Mrs. Clara's footsteps, and to differentiate the scents of each flower in the garden. The community, touched by the story of resilience and the kindness of Miguel and Mrs. Clara, offered support in every way. Neighbors brought sweets, told stories, and offered to help, creating a network of affection that enveloped Lucas. Dr. Ricardo, satisfied with the justice served, visited them regularly, no longer as a lawyer, but as a friend. Jose, the old treasure hunter, also became a beloved figure, sharing desert tales that fascinated Lucas. While Lucas's life filled with light and affection, in the mansion, Ilara lived in a deafening silence. Stripped of her fortune and reputation, she wandered through the empty rooms, the echo of her own footsteps her only company. The bitterness and avarice that once drove her now consumed her from within, leaving her with an emptiness no wealth could fill. Her punishment was not imprisonment, but relentless solitude, the awareness of having lost everything due to her own cruelty. She sat in her favorite armchair, her eyes fixed on an invisible point, remembering Lucas's innocent laughter, which she had disowned. The weight of her choices was a burden heavier than any chain. Lucas, the boy the world had considered a burden, became a symbol of resilience and love's ability to heal the deepest wounds. His story, told by word of mouth, inspired everyone, reminding them that true wealth lies in the kindness of the heart. The jaguar Sombra, the desert beast who became a guardian angel, remained by his side, an unbreakable link between wild nature and human tenderness. Justice had prevailed, not only in the courts, but in the restoration of a boy's dignity and the affirmation that compassion and altruism are the greatest forces in the universe, capable of transforming the darkest of existences into a beacon of hope and love, radiating warmth to all who surrounded him.